Hello again, I'm Jim Raymond with the State Recovery Task Force at the Colorado Emergency Operations Center. In Colorado, the State Recovery Task Force is a combination of state departments and agencies that come together after disasters to help move recovery actions as rapidly and effectively as possible. When you think of disasters, people often think of the response, the evacuations, sheltering, and keeping people safe. And while life safety is the most important part of the response to a disaster, keeping our cultural heritage safe and secure and preserving it is important to Coloradoans. That's why I've invited Todd McMahon, Amy Zimmer, and Carl Stewart to talk about how to plan and to take steps to recover from disasters that have affected cultural resources, which include historic and archaeological sites, as well as cultural institutions such as museums and libraries. You'll get a lot of useful information out of today's conversation with these professionals from the cultural and historic field. Thanks to all of you for being here. First, I'd like to ask Todd McMahon to give us a little background on the state's interest in historical places. Thanks for joining us, Todd.
Thank you, Jim. Well, most people know History Colorado, but most people don't know that History Colorado is a museum institution as well as a state agency. And we have many different divisions. Many people are also familiar with our many small community museums spread across the state. We also have other divisions within History Colorado, such as the State Historical Fund, the State Historic Preservation Office, and the State Archaeologist Office, the two divisions, the latter two of which I work under. While we have a lot of issues with emergencies that take place across Colorado, History Colorado's interest is in a lot of different historic places. We regularly consult with federal agencies, for instance, on project effects, and we do a lot of consultation with a lot of different groups. We also have a real interest in making sure that all of these historic places are saved and secured. Actually, there is also an interest in all things historic that includes things such as main streets, historic house museums, and some not so noticeable things like archaeological sites that are of American Indian ancestry. So there's a lot that we do. And we also have an interest from the state's point of view because all archaeological sites and also paleontological sites have a title interest in them. So we have particular interest in trying to find as many ways as possible to have these resources preserved, particularly when disasters and the need for recovery after disasters happens.
So how exactly does History Colorado help with recovery or emergency efforts then?
Well, I manage a program called the State Approved Museums and Cultural Repositories program, where we kind of accredit county museums and other state centers like visitor centers to be trustees to hold state archaeological and fossil collections. I have a deep commitment then to facilitate emergency response recovery efforts for all these partners. We have currently over 39 approved facilities spread across Colorado. I often feel pretty thin with all of my duties, so we do rely on a lot of different partners out there to help facilitate a lot of our needs. In particular, and most especially, when it comes to emergency management, the group that we rely heavily on is the one that is called the Colorado Cultural Historic Resources Task Force.
Is that made up primarily of volunteers?
It is. It's entirely made up of volunteers, and most of us are either historians, museum professionals, librarian professionals, archaeologists, and other cultural resource type people.
Well, that's great. We'll talk about a specific example in just a minute about how we came together to help recover from a disaster, a historical place. But before we do that, I'd like to turn to Amy Zimmer. Amy's the chair of the Cultural Historic Resource Task Force in Colorado. Amy, thanks for being with us. Can you tell us a little bit about this task force and what's its history and what does it try to do?
Sure, thanks, Jim. So the CHR task force, we call it CHR for short. CHR task force was formed in 2012 with the goal of bringing together the cultural heritage community and the emergency management community and kind of get them talking to each other. So by cultural heritage, we're referring to things like museums of all kinds, whether they be art museums, natural history museums, all kinds of museums, libraries of different types, archives, archaeological collections, historic buildings, historic sites, all those kind of things would fall under this group. So under the State Emergency Operations Plan, cultural and historic resources are grouped under ESF 11, which is along with agriculture and natural resources. That's kind of part of the reason why we formed our group, to sort of bring special awareness to this cultural side, because our needs are really very different, as you might expect, from agriculture or from natural resources. So the idea for the task force came from two individuals, one from Auraria Library and one from DHSEM, and they came together, formed it, and now both have actually moved on to different jobs, but the group has carried on through the many volunteers that they recruited, and we've continued on with the participation of a variety of interested professionals, along with advisory members from FEMA and from the Department of the Interior, from the International Foundation for Cultural Property Protection, and several other advisory groups. We also have a listserv that has over 250 members all across the state, and we have a website, chrtaskforce.com, which you can go to if you're interested in joining that listserv. You can find out information on the website. And we're also here, as Todd mentioned earlier, to assist emergency and regional managers with identifying cultural and historic resources that are in need of protection.
Really, over the last couple of years, the State Recovery Task Force has really formed a great alliance with the Cultural Historic Resource Task Force. So whenever we do have an emergency or a disaster that has recovery consequences to it, we're immediately reaching out and notifying your members. And as you mentioned, as a result, really bringing to bear the resources from 250 people from around the state that can work on this. Any issues we have surrounding historical or anthropological sites. So what other resources is the CHR task force supporting?
So, well, we've done a lot of things. So like currently, we've been working on a lot of different marketing and educational efforts to try and get the word out about the group, and try and get more professionals involved, and more from both sides, both from the emergency manager side and from the cultural side. This year, of course, has been certainly a busy year with COVID-19, and also with the protests that have gone on downtown, which have affected a lot of our buildings. So we've kind of been in, some discussion about how those things have affected staff, buildings, and collections. And then, of course, every summer we help out however we can during the wildfire season. During the 2013 floods, we were pretty involved. So we're here to provide assistance for evacuation, things like that. You'll hear more about that from Carl in a few minutes, so I won't talk much about that. But another thing that one of our steering committee members has been developing a program for identifying and mapping historic sites that are in floodplains, and I think that'll be a really helpful resource when that's finished. So we've got a lot of different things going on.
Well, thanks very much, Anne. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Let's move on then and talk about a specific example that I think is very interesting. And I'll ask Carl Stewart. He's a steering committee member of the CHR task force who personally helped facilitate the move of an entire museum and archive at Lake City, Colorado, in Hinsdale County, in advance of the threat of down timber and avalanches that were really threatening to flood the entire town. Thanks for joining us, Carl. Can you tell us a little about how you got involved in this effort, and how did you find financial and volunteer support to bring this to a successful conclusion?
Sure, but it wasn't just me who saved that museum. It was the Lake City had a big team of volunteers, and they were ready to go. And the way I got involved was there was a conference call with DHSEM and History Colorado and a lot of our board members, and Lake City was asking not for volunteers as much as for some expertise. And I had some training through I'm actually a National Heritage Responder. And so I went to the organization that did this training, and they were able to give us some money. They gave us $1,000 to buy supplies, and then the gas and truck to drive from Denver to Lake City and back. So I wasn't doing anything else that Memorial weekend. So I went on to Lake City and saw what they had, what they needed to do, and helped them get organized. They did a great job of getting their priorities ahead of time. And we evacuated this museum that was threatened by the flooding river, which, as you said, could have really devastated the whole town.
Well, we're not completely out of the woods yet on that. I understand that we're still watching that to make sure that no disaster outcomes occur as a result of the big snow and the avalanche up in the valley. But it sounds like let's translate that into things that other institutions can do in an emergency. Could you give us some ideas so that we can share those across the state?
Well, the main thing that they need to have is a sense of what their priorities are. You know, what would a museum do? What would they take with them if they had, you know, just an hour to evacuate, which is more likely the case. This time we had a few days, but it's really more often that with these statewide disasters that it's a fire or something like that, and you really don't have much time to evacuate. So you need to know what your priorities, what you're going to take first, where you would take it. We had to figure out what to take to Gunnison, climate-controlled storage, and what we could just put on metal containers on the hill near Lake City. So those are some of the main things that we do. I've got a lot of experience with emergencies in our library and in different libraries, but it's rare for us to actually have an opportunity like that to where there's a flood that that we think is going to come, and so we have time to actually evacuate. We've been involved in one other evacuation down in Colorado Springs, out in front of the Black Forest fire, but we always need to be ready to respond to an emergency, and priorities are the main thing.
Well, I want to thank you. Special thanks to Todd, Amy, and Carl sharing some of their insights with Colorado emergency managers on the recovery aspects, so we don't hear about all that often. And I'm really glad that the Cultural Historic Resource Task Force and the State Recovery Task Force work so well together, so that when we have emergencies in the future, Coloradans can rest assured that we're going to work to preserve our historic and cultural heritage. On behalf of the State Recovery Task Force, I want to send a thank you to everybody working in emergency management. Be safe and be well.